Hello, good afternoon. My name is Ravinder. I welcome you all to this fourth episode of our Science Stories. Scientific advancement are human stories rooted in human quest and struggle. There is a lot that happens in students' life during their PhD phase. For many, the exposure to science and scientific worldview becomes a life-affirming experience. The transition to a new value system is often rocky and discomforting. It involves asking searching questions, questioning your pet assumptions, dissecting your own beliefs, and securing new ground to stand. A great deal of unlearning has to happen before new learning could begin. In these stories, our goal is to capture unique and transformative experiences of young research scholars that shape their lives. For today's Science Story episode, we have two special guests, Dr. Preethi Krishnamoorthy and Dr. Avinash Surendran. Both Preethi and Avinash had a close association with IIA in past. Preethi has done her PhD from Christ University, with Professor Jayant Murthy being her co-supervisor in IIA. Avinash had joined the institute in 2011 under our MTech PhD program. He later spent most of his time in Ayuka, Pune for his PhD. Preethi is currently a postdoctoral researcher at Subaru Telescope at Hawaii in USA. She is working on a citizen science project called Panoptis that builds robotic telescopes to detect exoplanets with the help of citizen scientists around the world. She likes using astronomy as a tool to engage school children in interactive sessions and hands-on activities. She helps them learn science and develop scientific temper. She also enjoys using their crowdfunded telescope to conduct public skywatch sessions and do astrophotography. Astronomy was Preethi's passion from childhood. She denounced family astrologers and fought many battles despite many odds. She chose her priorities and pursued them to be what she is today. Avinash Surendran is also a postdoctorate fellow at Keck Observatory, just next door to the Subaru Telescope. He is contributing to the development of new adaptive optics system to improve the image qualities of the telescope. In his spare time, he loves to tinker with their crowdfunded telescope and figure out the right combination of optics and electronics needed for Preethi to do her astrophotography. Avinash, in his school, was so fascinated by science fiction, he thought whatever they showed in Star Trek serial was all real. In their own stories, in their own words, Avinash in his work is trying to push the frontier of technology for science, and Preethi is trying to bridge the gap between science and society. So please join me in welcoming Preethi and Avinash. They have joined us live from Hawaii. So welcome Preethi and Avinash, and thank you for joining at late night from Hawaii. So both of you have crafted a remarkable story that is artful, witty, and inspiring. We will play a pre-recorded video of your science story first. And I request the audience to post their queries and questions in the comment section below. We would respond to them during the discussion.
Hello everyone, I am Avinash.
And I'm Preethi.
First of all, we are delighted to be here as part of the ongoing Science Story series conducted by IA. Baniel, we thank you for making us a part of this conversation. We hope our story will be useful for those of you who wish to carve out a career in scientific research, and we also hope that some parts of our story might be relatable to you in your own personal lives.
Or at least entertain you for the next few minutes. So we will get started with our science story now. we'll keep it real by including the failures and successes we have had so far. So sit back, relax, and enjoy our little story of how we failed and yet reached where we are now. Go get a cup of coffee if you have to, and let's get started. So we'll start by first tracing our steps from school until our PhD. You want to go first?
Yeah, so I was born in Trivandrum in the state of Kerala in India, and I did my schooling in a CBSE school there. I actually did not have any specific interest in astronomy, but there were two important things which veered me in the path of astronomy. So science fiction series like Star Trek and all were very popular during that time, and I loved the series. And there was a physics tuition teacher in my 9th and 10th standard who loved students who asked a lot of questions, which is quite rare, I would say, nowadays. I used to pester her about fictional warp drives and starships, and she would patiently tell me what was possible under the laws of physics and what was not. I was actually very dumb that in my high school, I thought the things that they showed in sci-fi series like Star Trek were real. That when it got to the point where when I saw my first rocket launch at VSSC in Trivandrum, I was actually so disappointed. I actually thought that they would launch starships and things that they show on TV, but I was actually disappointed when I didn't see any of those and it was a tiny rocket launching. But anyway, so a receptive physics teacher at an early age was quite helpful in my career path, I would say. And growing up in a household with parents who were doctors and who were quite quick to complain about any pseudoscience in their medical fields helped in fostering rational conversations at home itself. So that's my school life. Over to you.
Okay. So I was born in Tamil Nadu, but I was brought up completely in Bengaluru, where I did all my schooling. I studied in ICSE board, and when I was in school, I was an above average student when I was in primary and middle school, and then I very, very graciously floated to becoming a below average student in high school. In high school, I was a bit of a troublemaker. I was not interested in studies, and I didn't see much sense in scrambling to score high marks. And to add to all that, I hated science. I liked biology because I like to draw, and I like some parts of mathematics like geometry and trigonometry, again because they have elements of drawing in them. I hated physics, but I loved astronomy. So one of my first associations with astronomy is actually a memory narrated to be by my father. It's not my own memory. So when I was around, I think 5 or 6 years old, we lived in a small rental home. I remember the home where the washrooms were outside the home. So late into the night, I would wake up my father pretending to want to use the washroom, get him to open the main door, and then go out to look at the stars. I was too small to open the main door by myself at that time, so I had to come up with excuses for them to open the door so I could go out and see the stars. So for me, astronomy has always been a constant in my life as far or as long as I can remember, irrespective of whether I was good at studies, bad at studies, or I was a good child, bad child, irrespective of any of that, astronomy was always there with me. In high school, so every time someone asked me, this golden question you asked when you are in your 10th or 12th or end of any of these things, what do you want to do in future? And I would always say, I want to do astronomy, but I don't like physics, so I don't know what to do. And I would leave them with that hanging question and just go away. But fortunately, my like for astronomy overpowered my dislike for physics, and I decided to take up science for my pre-university after I managed to pass high school with I think that was distinction marks category at that point, and which I was very happy with because I didn't even think I would actually pass. But it brought shame upon my whole family because there was always some neighbor or some classmate who scored higher than me. So that's how nicely my school life ended.
Yeah, that's an interesting story. It's quite different how we both grew up in school. So immediately after 10th, entrance coaching starts. Parents were doctors, and it was time to choose a career. Any usual parents are like either choose engineering or medicine, but they gave me leeway to choose whatever I wanted. I loved biology, but I was horrible at diagrams. So this was the time to choose a career path, and I finally chose engineering because I loved math and to design things, not necessarily make things with my hand, and but to design things and to see if it stood the test of feasibility under physical laws. So I thought engineering would be conducive for that kind of a love for design. So over there in my 11th and 12th standard also, another good physics teacher helped me there to retain the love for physics. So what about your 12th?
So after school, I joined for a PCMB course at a pre-university college. So that is physics, chemistry, maths and biology. In the first year, I was still coming to terms with physics and I was mostly scoring average marks. And I think by second year, I decided to focus a little more on physics because my astronomy ambition and dream depended on it. So I didn't know how to approach it initially. So what I did was I kept aside all my college notes and study guides, which are usually framed around the important questions for exams. So I stuck to the textbooks, which had information over and above what you need for exams, and I started reading to understand. I would sometimes spend half an hour to an hour just on one paragraph, and often that paragraph would be the introduction to the topic. I made sure I understood what was being explained there. I started focusing on understanding concepts rather than learning for exams, and that's where everything changed for me. With that, I actually started liking physics after that. So one of the most valuable lessons I learned at that time, which might be useful for some of you as well, is that my dislike and like for subjects in school and up to that point depended on whether I liked the teacher or not. If the teacher was good at teaching, or if that subject period felt good, I liked the subject. If the teacher was bad, or if I had bad memories associated with that period, I disliked the subject. So something as simple as if it was a subject where they gave a lot of assignments, and being that I was not someone who kept up with marks and assignments in school because I wasn't seeing much point in it at that point, that subject would be a bad subject for me because the teacher would come to the class and ask for who all has not submitted the assignment. There would be some of you that would get up and go, ma'am, I'm completed, and submit. There would be some who would say, ma'am, I couldn't do it because of so and so reason. I would just be sitting there in utter shock, not knowing that there was an assignment given. So that subject became a bad subject for me, and I disliked the subject for those reasons. So once I started studying on my own, the teacher just became a medium between me and that subject. The medium can be good or bad, and that should not affect how I feel about the subject itself. So if there is a subject you think you don't like, look a little deeper into it to see if you dislike the subject or a teacher who taught you that subject. So I focused so much more on physics that year in my 12th that I almost scored full marks in physics, which had not happened in my life for half my life at that point of time in the board exam. And I just managed to pass in mathematics. And this information will come to haunt me later, much later in life. So, and as far as astronomy is concerned, during my 12th, I also joined for a summer school in astronomy and astrophysics at the MP Birla Institute of Fundamental Research. So for me, astronomy was something that I was actively pursuing in some form or the other, irrespective of how my studies were going on the other side. So that was my 12th ending.
Such a roller coaster. So for me, immediately after 12th, I did score decent marks in the state engineering test, but I guess I was not motivated enough or didn't work hard enough or wasn't pressurized enough from home for the IITs or the NITs, which are considered the elite colleges. So I had got with the good state engineering scores, I got admission to a top state engineering college. So that converted to a very low fee for my undergraduate course, but the problem about that was that it was one of the worst teaching experiences I have ever gone through. So, and these were my first experiences of failure and mediocrity, and of course there is a first time for everything, and I had to deal with that. And the motivation for anything academic went down a lot, but I did keep my marks high enough for any future possibility. But by the end of engineering, I had no idea what to do after engineering. I knew for sure that I did not want a software job where I would be sitting in front of the computer coding for God knows how long. So that's the only thing I knew about.
I think in both our stories, that's the only commonality that we both didn't want to get into a software job through one of the typical recruitments at the end of the degree or engineering, whatever. So, Yasitan.
Yep.
Okay. So, after my PUC, I joined the same college for a BSc course in PCM, which is Physics, Chemistry and Maths. So the reason I chose to do a BSc was because I didn't know the different options that were available to do astronomy. I thought this was the only way. I only knew that I had to keep choosing physics with mathematics at every step. I didn't know whom to approach for a career guidance in astronomy. And since I had also committed the heinous crime of choosing to do a BSc instead of the only two honorable fields any self-respecting Indian should take, that is engineering and medical, I couldn't approach anyone for career guidance without hearing don't join BSc or don't do a PhD. So I decided to follow the one path that I knew to astronomy after deliberately sabotaging my engineering and medical entrance exams so that I wasn't forced into engineering. In BSc, so I joined my BSc, and in BSc my marks were well above average because I was enjoying physics at that point of time, much better than my school days. And I was still studying based on what I liked rather than what gave me marks. So I would score decently in physical chemistry and I would almost fail in organic chemistry. So you all know that one chapter many subjects have at the end of the textbook, the chapter from which you might get like 1-2 mark question which can also be ignored in choice anyway, so no one ever bothers to study them. Those chapters were sometimes my favorite and I would spend 3-4 hours on them the evening before the exam. So as far as the astronomy side was there, so during my BSc, I also took up a 100-hour certificate course in astronomy and astrophysics at the MP Birla Institute of Fundamental Research. So this is the same place where I'd taken up a summer program previously. And this institute is based in Bengaluru near the planetarium. So this was my degree.
So for me, just after my degree, I did get 2 software jobs during the time of placement, but I was actually looking for any other alternative. So I actually did not know of the existence of the Indian Institute of Astrophysics even at the last year of my engineering, where I was looking for career options after that. So I actually wrote the IA entrance exam after seeing the advertisement in the newspaper as part of the 100 other entrance exam I wrote. But among some of the entrance exams that I got through, I did get through for the Indian Institute of Astrophysics entrance exam and the MTech in Astronomical Instrumentation, and I was actually eligible to join the MTech in Astronomical Instrumentation course. So for those of you who don't know about this course, this is a very interesting course which is done in MOU with Calcutta University, where the first year coursework is conducted at the Department of Applied Optics and Photonics in Calcutta University. So you are in Calcutta for the first year, not in Bangalore where the Indian Institute of Astrophysics is. So with a department rated nationally second in quality in the field of optics, the teachers were amazing. So I regained a lot of motivation back, and of course, because it's a completely new city. Gained a lot of life experiences since it was quite culturally different from the environment I grew up in. So overall, that first year of my master's degree in astronomical instrumentation was quite fruitful academically and personally. It was a great experience. So the second year unlike Preethi, I did not do any certificate courses and all, because I was quite new to astronomy, formal astronomy during that time. So it is in my second year of masters where I get my first hand at research in instrumentation. So I had initially chosen a project related to the 30-meter telescope, where the hype of large projects were coming up. This is a large multi-billion-dollar collaboration between 5 countries, including in India, and it sounded like a very good project. So I was actually driven by fascination for large optical telescopes. I still are. But the funding for TMT, or the 30-meter telescope, was not finalized by then, so I had to switch my projects to another project. And this sometimes happens when you are in the research field, where your research career will depend on the availability of funding for your project. So I had to switch projects to another project called a Lunar Scintillometer for the National Large Optical Telescope, where I thought the training in engineering could be put to use, and it still is involved in designing instrumentation for a large optical telescope. So I was guided actually by Dr. Banyal and Dr. Parihar at the Indian Institute of Astrophysics, where we built an instrument to study the nature of atmospheric turbulence close to the Earth's surface at a particular location, to understand whether it's a good site for astronomy, whether we can put a telescope there or not, or whether the atmospheric turbulence was bad or not. So the instrument did that by observing the changes in the moon's brightness caused by the Earth's atmosphere. So this data would be useful especially in the Himalayas, where ground layer turbulence is much stronger than in other areas because of the mountain ranges and their altitudes. So that was my MTech in a teapot. So since this was my first foray into scientific research, the project actually tested my ability to self-learn, especially on a completely new topic of the science of atmospheric turbulence in astronomy, which I had no training in, but which I still use to a great extent in my current career. So in addition to that, I also had to unlearn assumptions on the fields that I was already trained on. So in scientific research, the ability to find your own biases and correcting them is important for a very, very successful scientific career. So this project actually provided early training on the full life cycle of building a small instrument, testing whether it works as you expect it to, and to present the results in a peer-reviewed paper. This life cycle is quite important in every research field, no matter whether it's astronomy, chemistry, doesn't matter which one it is. So the full life cycle of actually starting, putting your research proposal, working on it, testing whatever you hypothesized upon, and publishing the result in a peer-reviewed paper is very important in a research career. And of course, it was not easy pickings. So the early steps were quite tough, as the current schooling and the college system does not prepare you for independent thinking. And you might have felt it yourself. It's mostly the memorization of facts, procedures, or certain phenomena in the physical world that the schooling system tells you, and it does not encourage you to question these assumptions, because most of the time, or I don't know if most of the time for you, but at least some of the time the teacher themselves does not know the answer to these questions, and you would have had several experiences where the teacher tries to curtail your questioning curiosities. So that's why the transition from college or school to a research career can be tough because of this reason. So that was the whole of my MTech in a nutshell. So how about you?
For me, so after my BSc, I joined for a MSc course in physics. It wasn't a smooth join as it looks like. I just went from BSc to MSc. One of the main things was that I had to argue my way out of getting married and wanting to be educated instead. So not going there, but so my university was very close to the Indian Institute of Astrophysics, and I applied for one of their summer programs during my MSc, and for which I got selected. I wasn't expecting that. So the project during my MSc, my project was on ultraviolet photometric simulations in the UV telescope, imaging telescope UVIT, and the Tel Aviv University ultraviolet explorer TOWIX bands of stars and stellar systems.
Oh, that's a handful.
When I read the title, when the letter came to me saying I have been selected and this is your project name, I freaked out. I had not heard of any of these terms previously. So I didn't know what to do, and I was terrified of the project, honestly, before I started. So for this particular project, I was working under Professor Gajendra Pandey, Professor Kameshwar Rao, and Rakesh Mohan at IIA. So I then continued along a similar topic a few months later for my MSc final semester project as well. So that was my project experience at the MSc level. I think this would be equivalent to your MTech project that you did.
Yeah.
So mine came through, partly it was a requirement for my MSc to have a short project at the end of the year, and the summer project was something that I took up extra. But it helped a lot because I was not diving blindly into my MSc project. I had a little bit of background and I could continue on the topic. And one thing was, I was then comfortable getting into the MSc project, and it gave me that little time to work with the project. And the second thing was, it was not a fresh start that was scary at that point of time. So, and the other benefit also being that because it was an astronomy project at an institute nearby, it was easy for me to visit the site as much as possible, and it was good to get that little bit of connection with astronomy and real research before getting into a PhD. So I had some familiarity with the place now, with the topic, with the people who worked over there. I think that made it a little easier for me to deal with when I went to the PhD after that.
Yeah, I mean, you had previous little bit of experience in astronomy, and it was a slow transition.
It was terrifying at every step, but better that than to be completely terrified with one big step towards the end.
That's good to know. So for me, immediately after my MTech, since this was an integrated MTech PhD course, and I decided to continue with my PhD at the Indian Institute of Astrophysics itself, there was an issue there that during that year, I think it was 2012, there was a dearth of project in instrumentation at IIA. So this does not exist now because of the advent of large projects like TMT, LIGO, and I mean many more which has come up. But it was different back then. So during that time, I switched to a collaborative project between IUCA, the Inter-University Center for Astronomy and Astrophysics in Pune, and IIA and the project was on putting the very heavy computations required for a specific field in astronomy called adaptive optics on a small chip. So usually these computations required for this field in astronomy takes up enough space in a supercomputer, and this usually needs to be done during the observation very near to a telescope itself. So there were huge advantages if we could miniaturize the size of computers which were used for adaptive optics and put it into a single chip. So I was concentrated on creating a dedicated chip to do adaptive optics. So, about adaptive optics is the field that I am working in even right now. It is a technique which is used to remove the effect of atmospheric turbulence on starlight before we capture it with any instrument. So you might have seen the stars twinkling at night. So what adaptive optics does is it removes the effect of twinkling of the stars by using some complicated electronics before it reaches the camera, after it comes through the telescope and before it reaches the camera. And the computations which are required for that requires a very large number of matrices to be multiplied 1,000 times a second, which takes a lot of computing power. So that was my PhD, to put all of that on a single chip. And with regards to lessons learned during PhD, I mean, it was a little different because it included the crafting of your own research project from scratch, including outlining of the requirements, goals, feasibility analysis, and writing proposals. And this was different from my master's, where the project was just given to me and I was told to do something very specific. So I was mainly working with Professor Ram Prakash at IUCA, who supervised this project. And he also helped in setting me up with collaborative work with Caltech and the 30-meter telescope, which actually helped in where I currently am. So that is mostly the story of my PhD.
So my case, after the MSc, now the standard route would be to take up entrance exams for PhD, like your NET and GATE and any individual exams which are conducted by institutes for their own PhD programs. Now by now you know that me and studying for marks or ranks don't go well together, and when I try to study I just get distracted by what I like to study rather than what I need to study for the exam. So my first mock attempt at writing NET didn't go too well, but it was a mock attempt during my MSc, so I didn't take it too seriously. Now I had always wanted to join IA for my PhD, but I could not register for their entrance exam because back then, I don't know about the current situation though, but back then they had this cutoff mark requirements for every subject from I think probably 10th standard or at least 12th until the MSc. So the cutoff was applied to every individual subject. And as I mentioned previously, I didn't do too well in my maths exam in my 12th standard, and that was below the threshold. So because of that one subject in that 1 year, I was not allowed to even register to appear for the entrance exam. So I decided to take a break from my MSc and spend some time preparing for the next NET exam. So meanwhile, I joined for a lecturer job in physics at Jyotinivas College for monetary support, for being independent, and to actively be involved in something every single day, because otherwise if I was just sitting at home, I would be parried off. So not going into details, but joining PhD came after a lot of fights and downright ignoring or rejecting arranged marriage proposals, and the fights for the PhD was much more than the fight required to join MSc. And the plans I had for my life were a lot different from what my family astrologer wanted it to be. So in your case, pseudoscience was something, I guess, at your home fought very often. It was not allowed to enter the house. In my case, it was always around me. It was this dark cloud that always lingered above me that I couldn't chase away. But I knew it was there.
I can't imagine living up like that. Yeah.
I was not a part of it. I tried to fight it where I could, especially when it started affecting my life and my future.
Yeah.
I made sure to fight it. So while on this break, I came across while I was also teaching at Jyotinivas College and everything, I came across an advertisement for a JRF post. So this is a junior research fellow at Christ University for a project in astronomy. And one of the conditions of the job was that the candidate would register for a PhD at the same university after completing the first year of JRF. I applied for the job, I attended the interview and got selected. And a year later, I registered for my PhD at the same university. So the project had a principal investigator and co-investigator from within the university, and the co-investigator from IA, which was Professor Jayant Murthy. So he was my PhD co-guide and my main subject guide for my PhD work. So in some way, I ended up doing my PhD with the Indian Institute of Astrophysics still in picture. So I made my peace with that. So for my PhD itself, I worked on the topic of interstellar medium. So to simply put, interstellar medium is the gas and dust particles that exist between stars and stellar systems in our Milky Way galaxy. So this region of space that exists between the stars, which often gets branded as vacuum, is not actually a perfect vacuum. So it has a very low density of gas and dust particles, and my PhD was studying the three-dimensional distribution of this medium. And studying this medium is important because just like the way he studied our atmosphere, because it interferes with the light that is reaching us, this interstellar medium also interferes with the light that is reaching us from the stars. So it's important to understand it so that you can negate its effects. And you can also understand a lot of other things, like depending on what sort of gas it is or dust it is, the evolution of stars which are present in that medium. A lot of science comes out of that. So one of the things I think I should mention about the PhD part is, like in his case, when he went from his MTech to his PhD, his topic changed. So in my case, the project was a fixed topic. So when I joined the project, the topic was already decided, and the work that needed to be carried out was sort of outlined. A proposal was there, so I had to work on that topic. But about, I think, 1.5 years into working that, and when the first paper came out and everything, we realized that the amount of effort needed to pursue that subtopic to get good science out of it, the ratio didn't seem too good. Like, it felt like a lot of time had to be put in to get a little science out of it, and it didn't make a lot of sense. So at that point of time, Professor Jayant Murthy shifted the topic a little bit. We were still within the main topic, which was the interstellar medium, but the work itself was changed. So the first topic didn't work out, and we moved to a slightly different way of doing things after that. So this, I feel, is something that you would come across a lot in research too, where you start with a question, you're moving towards an answer, you're hoping that you would find this answer, but somewhere halfway through you realize that it can't progress anymore, and very often you have to change topics, or you have to change the question you're asking. Sometimes the entire question changes, sometimes just the way you ask the question can change. So this is something that happens often in research, not just at the PhD level, generally in research itself.
So, in addition to our PhDs, on a personal note, this was actually where our paths merged and we actually met each other.
Misery loves company.
So we got to know each other over, we used to go to these outreach programs quite a lot. And so we got to know each other over several outreach programs that were conducted at schools and funded by the Indian Institute of Astrophysics. And we were part of the same team where we had to cooperate and do similar stuff for educating school children near the institute. So that's a short personal note of how we got together. So this actually brings me to where we are right now. So I have been working as a postdoctoral fellow at the Keck Observatory in Hawaii for the past about 1 year. So those are the twin domes shooting lasers up into the sky in the Inset movie shown. So I work on a project, I work on the same field of adaptive optics, where I work on a project to upgrade the existing adaptive optics system at the Keck Observatory from the single laser that you see in the Inset movie to 4 lasers. So where we can actually sense the atmospheric turbulence properties of larger areas of the sky and hence provide better astronomical images. So it's more or less like, it's called tomographic adaptive optics. So it's more or less like you might have heard about CT scans in hospitals. It's the full form of a CT scan is computed tomography. So it sends electromagnetic beams into your body and it recreates the organs in your body in a three-dimensional format. So that is the same thing that we are doing with the Earth's atmosphere. We are recreating the atmospheric turbulence properties in 3 dimension by shooting 4 lasers into the sky and seeing the light reflected back by the atmosphere. So while we do this, we are getting closer and closer to a telescope which can deliver images with a quality as if it were in space itself. So, and for me, I'm very happy here because this is the first time I'm working on a large facility class instrument, and I'm amazed at the engineering skills which were required to build the telescope and to operate it. So that's where we are right now. So what do you do?
So I am now also working as a postdoc, but I am working at Subaru Telescope. So in the video that's running, there's this more cuboid looking dome in the video, so that is Subaru Telescope. And I work on a project called Panoptes. The project involves the public building low-cost robotic telescopes that can be used to detect transiting exoplanets. So this is a very fun project for me. It's completely different from what I did during my PhD, but it gels very well with different interests that I have. So for one thing, it is a citizen science project, which means that it involves a lot of education and outreach elements in it, which I enjoy. And there is building your own little robotic telescopes, and right now with the team I'm building one of my own. And I think it's exciting that we can do something like that with citizens, with the public, school children, get them to build a robot, and from your backyard you can find your own exoplanets. So that is something I find
I agree, yeah.
We work on, I think, in that sense too, extremes in instrumentation. Mine is a little more do it in your own backyard sort of a thing, and yours is at the cutting edge.
Yeah, I agree.
So yeah, so we work
and
on,
both are important, and both are
Yes,
equally
yes,
important.
very important, yes.
I mean, your project is very important for the science society interface,
yes,
and mine is important for pushing the frontier of the existing science itself.
yeah. So I think citizen science makes a big difference to a society, because there's a big gap between science and the public, the general public. You have science done by what is typically just seen as scientists, and then you have the general public that usually stays away from it, and the only interface that you typically see between them would be when there are discoveries, and it would appear in newspapers or all over the news channels, and the scientist would be called for an interview and the people watch that. That is a one-day thing or 2 days thing. The excitement doesn't last very long, and what people see is the final result of work that might have taken decades. And I don't think they understand that. And I mean, we can't expect them to understand that when they don't have that information also. They are not part of the process, they are part of the result, and just hearing the discoveries like an exciting news, that's it, and it's forgotten, and then the next exciting news, and this is completely forgotten. So citizen science, I think, is wonderful that it lets people do science following the same research methodology. So they understand the process, they understand how it happens, and they appreciate every new result, especially when it can be something small, but when it comes from them, when they have realized that they have just contributed some tiny piece of information that's brand new, they understand science better, and they're more appreciative of the bigger discoveries that happen.
And I just want to add to that I mean, especially today, I mean, when a pandemic is raging around the world and climate change is affecting all of us, scientific awareness is very important among everyone. I mean, I don't expect everyone to like science or be scientists. I mean, you can't expect that. But at least to be aware, at least to understand what is scientifically possible or what is not. Trying to figure out pseudoscience from the actual science. It is kind of having the awareness of differentiating between good music and horrible music. So that I feel is very important even for survival in the world that we are living in. So that's my 2 cents about the science society interface.
So one thing we wanted to highlight in our stories was how different we both are in the way we do things, how different we were as students, how different our marks were, and yet the both of us are now working in astronomy today. Our telescopes are next to each other, and we are in 2 extremely different projects. So some of you might have related better to his story, and some of you might have related to my story a little more. So we just want to tell you that both are fine. So in his case, he did not start off with an ambition to do astronomy, but he consistently had good marks, and that allowed him the advantage to pick from several paths that he could take. And he happened to take the one that led him to astronomy. In my case, I had a very strong ambition, and every time I had to make a decision, I took the one that would take me closer to that ambition. We both reached a very similar destination through very different paths, which were based on our strengths and how we like to do things. So we just want to add that every person is unique in their strengths and weaknesses. It is important that you understand them and forge the path that's best suited for your strengths.
So that's all from us. Again, thank you for being with us for this conversation. I really hope this helped you in some way or the other. I mean, listening to our stories and how we progressed with respect to our careers, and whether you can take away some lessons from it. I mean, things we should have known but only know right now at this stage of the career. I mean, yeah. So thank you for being with us for this conversation, and see you all in the live version.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.
So, very well narrated. Thank you, Preethi and Avinash. So this video was recorded in your backyard, I suppose. Before we go further, I just want to say that we had a technical failure. The sound system was not working in the beginning, so the program was delayed by 5 minutes or so. So we are very sorry for that. While we wait for others to respond, we have compiled a set of questions that we have for you, Preethi and Avinash. So citizen science, for example, they say is creating space for science engagement and learning outside the traditional laboratory and classroom settings. And it has the potential to democratize science. So Preethi, you are leading one of such project in Hawaii. Tell us a little bit more about this project. What are the different ways the non-scientists can participate in it? And what are the basic skills they need to be part of these experiments? Just briefly, because you have already explained it, so it's fine if you just briefly answer these.
Sure. So first of all, thanks for that question, because I think it's very important for people to know about citizen science. So just to give an introduction, citizen science is public participating and collaborating in scientific research. So to simply put, it is a collaboration between anyone in the public who's interested in a certain field and willing to volunteer their time, and the collaboration is with the scientists in that field. So to understand what kind of skills are needed, I think I'll give a few examples of different projects that will give a better idea. So one of the most well-known citizen science projects in India is the Bird Count India and eBird. So this is suitable for people who like to bird watch or do bird photography. In this case, the interested participant creates an online account, and then they document their bird sightings with the location, date, and time information. So this particular example is an on-site example of citizen science project, where the participant needs to be at a certain location, and they also need to be familiar with different species of birds to document the sightings correctly. So this information is then used by the scientists to study the bird population distribution, their area of spread, understand the habitats, etc. So in this particular citizen science case, I think the knowledge they need is to know a little bit about the bird species, at least the local bird species where they are doing this. And it's an on-site example. So let me give another example, which is humpback whale counting. So this is also an on-site participation, which we both took part in a few months back. This did not require us to have any prior knowledge about marine biology or humpback whales. All we had to do was we were given a location. We had to go to that location on a certain date and certain time and count the number of whales we saw. So this was an on-site, but no knowledge required. We just needed to count numbers, and if we knew to count until 30 or 40, we were good.
And it was fun.
And another example I would like to give, which is completely different, is NASA has a citizen science project called NemoNet. It is a single player iPad game that even children can play and help to classify coral reefs from all over the world. This is completely online, and you don't need to have any subject knowledge to play this game. So citizen science projects there are plenty of them, and they vary a lot. Just often comes down to picking the one that is right for you. So it can be in terms of your area of interest, how much time you're willing to volunteer, if you prefer an online activity or on-site activity, if you need prior knowledge of the subject, things like that. So if there is a subject that anyone is interested in, the one thing I would just suggest is to just go online and search for citizen science along with that subject name. And highly likely they'll see some project results over there, and they might be able to help the scientists who are working in that field. And coming to my project, the citizen science project that I am working on is called Panoply, as I mentioned in the video. So this project involves the public and students building low-cost robotic telescopes and using components that are already available in the market. And this unit is used to discover transiting exoplanets. So the founder of the project is Olivier Gouillon, who is my current supervisor as well. He started the project in his garage about 10 years back with a very basic telescope mount, DSLR cameras, and a lot of silicon glue to hold them together. These are things that most amateur astronomers in India already have, except maybe for the glue part. And he started his career as an amateur astronomer. This Panoptis unit consists of DSLRs that takes images of the night sky, an equatorial mount for tracking the sky. Some Arduinos and Raspberry Pis are programmed to control the unit remotely. So sitting here, if I have a unit built, installed somewhere, I can control it remotely from home. It has a weather station to check for clouds and rain and make sure it is safe to observe that night. And every night it takes a series of images of the same field over the duration of a few hours. And then they're automatically uploaded to the cloud. And from there is a pipeline to automatically process it as well. And the brightness of the stars in these images is then converted into light curves. And we are looking for a variability in these light curves to find these transiting exoplanets. So if anyone is explicitly interested in the project, they can go check the Panoptis website, which is projectpanoptis.org.
So students have to have some background in, let us say, BSc level or some such thing to be part of it, or no?
So for the building process itself, they don't need to be, because our builders range from middle school children till scientists. So the building process has been kept very easy. All information is available online, and the parts are easily available online, or you can just get it from some local stores for some of the parts. And the instructions are also clear that they can build the unit on their own. So that part of the project is something that middle school students onwards are doing. The project, the part where I think they will need some experience would be if they're interested in the data analysis, or if they are interested in contributing to the pipeline itself of the data processing. So for data processing pipeline, everything is open source. It's on GitHub. And if they're interested in data analysis, the data is also available open to public. They can do their own analysis, or they can get in contact with the team also if they want to work with us in anything.
Yeah. Okay, that sounds interesting. So Avinash, you also briefly talked about the importance of scientific awareness. But a world so full of distractions, half-truths, and outright lies, one might wonder why would anyone care about what happens in the remote corners of the universe? How does it matter if there is a planet discovered around yet another star or a comet unexpectedly shows up in the evening sky? So my question is, why should ordinary people be interested in science? And in short, why science matters in our lives and how to make it more appealing and accessible for common people?
This, I think, Preethi is more passionate to answer this
Okay,
question.
sure. Right. No Go ahead.
I'll continue on this.
You add on if you feel something is that.
It's a very difficult question.
Sounds very simple, but it is very difficult. Actually, more than difficult, I would say it's a very fundamental question that a lot of us have in science, and
Right.
questions in science, it's not going to be easy to answer.
Sure.
So I think the question itself has multiple parts to it, and there are different ways to answer them. I will respond to one part of that question about people being interested in science.
Right.
And for why people should be interested in science, I think this is something that has been and is still being answered by a lot of people who are already in science. I would like to approach this question from a different point of view of how to get people interested in science instead, because I think the why. So, in order to get the public interested in science, the way I see it, I think we first need to understand our audience. Now, I can imagine splitting the public into probably three very broad categories. So first would be, I'm taking the scientists and anyone who's working in the field of science. So these would be people who have some understanding of the scientific process, and they agree that science is important and needed. They don't necessarily think about it, but they're already in the field and they all just agree that this is important, yes. And they're part of progressing science in the big picture. The second category of people that I can think of is people who follow science, but are not working in the field itself. So these are the people who read science-related news, who find scientific discoveries interesting enough to follow. And they would also be the people who agree that science is important for the society, but they may or may not consciously question why or think about it any further than that. But science is something that they agree is important and they are interested in following science. The third category of people is people who don't follow any science or work in science. I think this is the category that we need to target. So I believe this category of people probably outnumbered the previous two categories put together. So these would be the people who have no interest in science and don't care for us trying to get them to be interested in science. So this is why I feel like every time we answer the question, why is science important? The big chunk of category of people is this category, and they are not interested. So the why doesn't really seem to get to them, or it doesn't matter to them. Right. So we can't approach them with the sole intention of getting them to accept science or think about science. But instead, what I think we should do is take the scientific method to them in the form of logic and reasoning as a tool for them to use to solve their own personal problems. We need to approach them from their point of view. What do they care about? What problems do they face? Can we show them how to use the scientific method to deal with these problems? Right. So unless we give them something that will directly impact them in their personal lives in very obvious ways, we may not be able to reach out to them. So I'll give a very simple example of where a lot of us might already be doing this, whether we agree to science or not. So let's say a friend or relative of yours is asking for some medical advice and you are not a doctor. The person has already been to a doctor and is not feeling confident of the treatment prescribed by the doctor. Maybe they were asked to get a surgery done immediately at the earliest, or their child was prescribed antibiotics by the doctor, and they're not feeling very confident of that. So here, this is a piece of advice a lot of us have given during such times. Why don't you get a second opinion from a different doctor if you're not sure? I have so far not seen anyone downright object that advice. For that person, it is one simple step he or she can take to get more clarity on their problems.
Yeah.
But if you think about it, we just applied the scientific method to an individual's problem. The person went to a doctor. Let's call that the experiment, which resulted in a data point in the form of the prescription or treatment. The person is unsure of this data point, and our advice to this person basically was, why don't you repeat the experiment by changing one parameter, that is a doctor, and check if the resulting data is the same or not. So this is applying the scientific method to a general public person's problems. The person who's giving solution
in their day-to-day problems, yes. Yeah.
So the person
yeah, maybe that's the better way to approach it, because what people relate immediately is their problems, their immediate concerns, and so on. So if we can make that use of thing to convey the ideas about scientific temper, scientific logic, and reasoning, then probably that would be. So yeah, very well said.
Once they understand the scientific method, they can argue for themselves for whether science is important or not, and we don't have to forcefully sell it to them. We don't have to sell the why to them anymore.
Right. No, that's important. Yes. So as a student, both of you have also balanced your academic and other interests very well, and you are also very deeply care about the problems of environment and other pressing issues. So do you think scientists should step out from their comfort zones to engage and speak up on matters that have direct bearing on the environment and our immediate society and neighborhood? Usually scientists don't speak up on most issues. So I just want to nudge you to know what you both think about it.
Yes. So we can already see all around the world where in a world completely filled with misinformation, how scientists are trying to, as you showed in the earlier question, compete with all the other modes of entertainment that are there, fight all the misinformation to get the correct information out into the public. So, I mean, I feel that when communicating to the public, there are two ways to communicate. It could be the product of science or the process of science, right? And with respect to the product of science, it's for example, we may have found phosgene on Venus, or we may have found this planet. And as Preethi said, this lasts for only a second. I mean, nothing more. As for the process of science, each field of science has a very different way of communicating it to the public. For example, I feel that one where it has been quite successful, where it has taken a lot of effort because of the urgency associated with it, is climate change. Because of the amount of documentaries that have come with respect to nature and how beautiful the planet is, not just saying that, oh, climate change will kill us all. Of course, there are documentaries with respect to that also, but in an indirect way, to communicate to the public how beautiful nature is and how we need to preserve that. And some of the documentaries, especially from David Attenborough, actually show the scientific process that they use to discover that, and they are beautiful. So that is a big exposure that we as scientists can do, work with documentary filmmakers, and that it will bring out the scientific process in a very entertaining way. And I mean, in an Indian context, I have not seen anyone rise up to that level so far, but I do hope in the future that something like that will happen. So, and as for the non-scientific issues that are prevailing in society that we have opinions about, I do agree that scientists are not experts in all fields, but that does not mean that we should not speak out on and discuss topics outside of this. Personally, this is a very personal answer. I mean, it may not apply to everyone, but personally, I have not been very courageous enough to be part of protests or to publicly be part of movements that I strongly support. But I have, for example, filed RTIs against government agencies to bring out the truth if I find misinformation that can actually harm the general public.
Right. I see.
So, and on a personal level, I find that the best way for me to connect with someone enough to make them see my perspective is for me to have the empathy to see theirs also.
Right.
Not work every time, and it usually takes a long time to forge that connection.
Yes.
But I find that this leaves the most lasting impact as compared to just throwing your opinion at their face.
Sure. I think that's very important. Unless
that-
you connect with someone emotionally, it's very
Yes.
difficult to make any difference, and
Yes.
that's becoming
You-
very obvious these days. Not obvious, but importance of that is probably historically.
You lose a lot of nuance if you are just
Yes.
putting your thoughts out without listening to the other
Right.
person. And also sometimes I myself come out of it as a changed man with a lot of broad perspectives and changed opinions. So it is fruitful personally also to do that. So
Right.
in the same way, I feel that this level of connectivity is also required for scientists to take the time to come down from their ivory towers and help the society, which made them who they are, right?
Yeah.
Forge deep connections with science and research. Come on, especially in this world where misinformation is running rampant and deep social connections are being replaced by social networks
Yes.
where you can just put on a mask and not see who you are talking to or fighting
Right.
with. I feel a lot of nuance is lost during conversations, and we as scientists can contribute a lot over that.
Yeah. So I also want to add that scientists are not paragon of virtues, but the
Yeah.
training in science that we get can help scientists to articulate a more balanced and perhaps nuanced view, and in a more persuasive and not partisan way. So probably that's where one has to pitch in and contribute in terms of bringing about awareness, right? So finally, last question. We don't have too many questions from the audience. There are very one or two, but I think we may not have time for the question from audience. So the last question is that it's a personal question. So apart from sharing a deep emotional bond and mutual passion for learning, what else bind you together? So is there anything else that you both deeply care and hope to make difference in future?
So you can add later. So we actually are quite opposite in terms of our likes and dislikes. So, for example, I love hiking, and she's not a big fan of hiking at all.
Or even to just take his previous example of how we said fighting. So he's the person who will fight in the background, file RTIs. I am the kind of person who will go on the street and shout at a person. Him in the awkward situation. So
Yeah.
we are different even the way we fight everything.
So even the we still agree to disagree on what to eat even some days. So, and it is like that. But what binds us together are similar ideological and political views, and I don't think we'll be together if we did
That's
not have
not the
that.
case. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. There might be couples who would have different ideological or political views and they are staying together. But for both of us, that is quite important.
So even in the previous one, like I said, we both fight differently. But what we agree on is that we need to fight them.
Yes. So
the way we do this.
The expression of how how that comes out, the ideological view comes out is quite different and sometimes very complementary, as you could have seen. So for example, we both deeply care about the environment in different ways. So I am a vocal proponent of decarbonization, and as part of that, I pushed hard to put a solar plant at IA, which offset most of the electricity usage. I had to fight a lot over there. And here in Hawaii, I went to great personal sacrifice to get an electric car, for example. And it makes me happy personally also. While Preethi, on the other hand, she is a vocal proponent of low waste lifestyle. So where she fought against the usage of any plastic utensils or bottles during her marriage, and with a lot of personal effort even now to carry our own biodegradable or steel utensils whenever we travel, and on a completely low plastic lifestyle. So, I mean, it comes out differently. That's what I mean.
Sure.
It's quite complementary.
Right. So,
But our basic ideologies are mostly the same, and I think that's the one that matters also.
right.
We can like or dislike the same foods, that's fine. But certain things I think are deeper than that, that need to match. That matches for us.
Yeah, so I think that's a good note to end today's program. And it's already past midnight in Hawaii. So nice talking to Preethi and Avinash. Thank you very much for your time and sharing your thoughts. And wish you all the best and keep doing the great work. Okay.
Thank you.
So we will continue these conversations in our next episode. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel to get regular updates about our outreach activities. And thank you for joining and have a nice weekend. Thanks.